You have a new boss coming in. You do not need to continue these prosecutions just to get it done like vindictive little prosecutors in the last final minutes of the game. Stopping the lawfare and the persecution of political opponents like our J6ers. That is unprecedented in American history and destroying our democracy.
It's controversial that when a new boss comes in with a new agenda, that the people who work there are going to support the president's agenda, right? Only in the federal government, only with a deep swamp do people, career employees think that they get to run the joint, as it were.
The DOJ is refusing to stop their prosecutions of the J6 defendants. Steve Baker is one defendant who was there doing journalism, who has been improperly prosecuted by the corrupt DOJ. Lefty journalists not prosecuted. Steve Baker, who has been holding the government accountable and investigating the J6 saga, is being prosecuted. And so now that Trump has won the election and has already explained that he'll be commuting and pardoning the J6ers who are victims of political prosecutions enacted by our government, prosecuted by our own government. Even if there were crimes committed there were not prosecutions that were brought via equal protection of the law. Certain classes of people got their lives obliterated, where other classes of people were supported and bailed out by Kamala Harris. So let's keep that in mind. But Steve Baker was there reporting on this, and they charged him. And now, since Trump has won, he's asking for continuance in his case. But unfortunately, the DOJ is saying no. They're going to try to squeeze people over these last 2 months, including people like William Alexander Pope, who you know on X. He's also asking for a continuance because Trump has made promises, and a normal, reasonable prosecutor with 2 months left on the clock would not continue their partisan hackery. If they were actually prosecuting according to the interest of justice, the American people have already spoken on this, and we'll see what the DOJ says, but it looks like they're not going to let up, obviously, because that's who they are. But here is what Stephen Baker said in his motion to continue, drafted by William Shipley Jr. You know him as Shipwrecked Crew on X, and Steve Baker's on X, by the way, and I recommend you follow him and Shipwrecked Crew because they're both doing good work in these matters. So here's what he says. All right, comes now defendant Stephen Baker, by and through his counsel, and moves this court to vacate all the dates that are coming up. It's in the interest of justice. Trump won. The DOJ is going to have a new boss in town, dad's home, and he's going to wants us to set a status conference for this case in February, a couple weeks after Trump takes office. However, on Friday, November 8th, the DOJ special counsel Jack Smith in the Trump prosecution case made an unopposed motion to vacate the briefing schedule in the January 6th case against Trump. The entirety of that motion says, Your Honor. So here's what Jack Smith says. Okay, I know this case is not being prosecuted by Jack Smith as regular DOJ prosecutors, but even Jack is saying the election was held and now it's unprecedented circumstances. That's an idea that Trump was going to win. Everybody knew it. By December 2, the government will file a status report. We've consulted with the defense, and so we're vacating these dates. The point being, if Trump's case is getting vacated and the DOJ is leaving him alone, how about us? So by that motion, the Justice Department, Your Honor, took the official position that the result of the November 5th election has resulted in an unprecedented circumstance, which they're just going to say, oh, it's only because of Trump, that constitutes grounds for pausing an ongoing criminal prosecution of a defendant in connection with the events of J6, saying, see, if they're going to stop that case, they got to stop this one. President-elect Trump stated on multiple occasions throughout his presidential campaign that if elected, he intended to issue pardons, sentence commutations, and order the dismissal of pending cases, and in other ways, bring an end to the DOJ's prosecutorial endeavors about J6. So given the position now that the DOJ, and even through Jack Smith, who's directly supervised by Garland, now that they're pursuing in the interest of justice, dropping the Trump case, that is what should happen here. It justifies pausing all proceedings in this matter, with the parties responding back to this court 70 days from now, not long at all, back in January, once Trump is in office. A continuance would conserve resources of this court. We don't need to have a trial and go through all of that if Trump's just going to come out and pardon us. And so for defendant Baker, the resources that might needlessly be expended are a lot. Personal financial costs. Baker's got to travel from Texas to Washington, D.C. And by the way, just as a reminder, remember Washington, D.C. this last election voted 93% for Kamala, which is why all the cases are there. The cost of housing and similar costs are also incurred by defense counsel, most of which would be avoided if we could just postpone this until Trump comes in. Now, for the government, further work by their attorneys would be necessary during that delay. And the consequences of denying this motion, if you don't grant it, with the history of the J6 cases as a backdrop, almost certain convictions for felony and misdemeanor offenses that would not happen otherwise. Like if we go go forward, we're going to get convicted because it's DC. It's a rigged jurisdiction. The unique circumstances now before this court, a president-elect having pledged to reverse the decision of the prior administration, and the DOJ is now making a representation in another case that they need a delay. We're justified here. This change in circumstances also compels the court to grant this motion, just as the district court Judge Chutkan did in her case. So to deny this motion, Your Honor, is going to be in opposition to the official DOJ position. It would run contrary to the interest of justice and likely subject Steve Baker to criminal convictions for no reason other than we're just in the middle of it. Before the government makes the claim that the people have an interest in the administration of justice, Baker would like to point out that the, quote, people on behalf of whom the government purports to speak made their voices clearly heard on November 5th, and that should mean something. So don't act like you're representing the people by doing the opposite of what the people just voted for. That should mean something to the DOJ without regard to what administration is now in charge. You have a new boss coming in. You do not need to continue these prosecutions just to get it done like vindictive little prosecutors in the last final minutes of the game. But they want to make it hurt because that's what their whole life is about. So we see another filing from Free State Will also is making the same argument. He says, on November 5th, the American people, Free State Will, aka William Alexander Pope, at Free State Will on X, representing himself, could use your support, says, on November 5th, the American people elected Donald Trump to be president of the United States. In delivering both an electoral victory and popular vote majority, the American people gave President Trump a mandate to carry out the agenda he campaigned on, which includes ending the J6 prosecutions and pardoning those who exercise their First Amendment rights to assemble at the Capitol. In contrast, Harris campaigned on continuing the prosecutions, and her platform was rejected. This outcome means a new mandate from the people justifies a continuance of this trial into the next administration. Saying American courts and written opinions have long pointed out the Declaration of Independence as a foundational document in our legal system. One of those principles is that the governments derive their powers from consent of the governed. In a Supreme Court case, they talked about this, saying there is a continuing relationship between the people. And so accordingly, this court, whose powers are derived from the people, should act in accordance with the people's vote. Now, while the current administration insists on continuing to pursue these charges against me, says Will, this court has broad discretion in all things, especially in matters of judicial economy. Court, you can set your own schedule and stuff like that. So if you have my trial, which is coming up on December 2nd for Will, trial, this court will spend long hours deciding disagreements over motions in limine and motions to compel and the admissibility of evidence and voir dire, jury selection, jury instructions. We're going to have 2 weeks selecting juries. Then we're going to hear trial. Regardless of what happens, the end result will be that the judicial economy will be wasted because there will never be a sentencing and I will be free. Trump is going to come into office by the time all this is concluded. The next administration has expressed a strong desire to investigate the involvement of federal agencies. Now, as this court knows very well, many of my motions have involved this subject, and we've read some of Will's stuff here before, and it's a lot of fun. One of them in particular, where he talks about really how prosecutors are not that attractive, which is true. I believe it is likely that exculpatory information that this administration, aka the Biden administration, has withheld will become available to me. If emerging information would have supported my, quote, raindrop theory defense, or if it pertains to one of many other requests, I will have a strong argument to have my trial overturned on appeal. Of course, a new trial would also drain judicial resources, and so the court could mitigate this risk by continuing my trial date until after the new administration takes office to see what other exculpatory information might emerge once they stop covering up the truth. The court is also aware of the strong possibility that a jury in my case might decide facts differently than the court has decided them in its bench verdict for my brother. Any significant differentiation will likely give my brother additional avenues for his appeal and bolster his arguments. And so those processes will also drain judicial resources, and so we don't need to do that. I also believe it's likely that some of the witnesses in my trial may perjure themselves. I don't want to damage their careers, but I will confront them, and I will vigorously question witnesses that are not being truthful. But if the trial is continued, I believe it's possible this could be resolved without a trial, but we need a continuance to do that. Now, I'm also sensitive to the fact that more than 90% of DC residents voted for Harris, like 93, and that they may find it especially difficult to look past those biases and be fair jurors. The current mood in DC will make jury selection even more difficult. I continue to believe that a fair jury trial is not possible for our defendants in DC. But if there should be a jury trial, it should happen after emotions have had time to cool. Not in December, when liberals are frothing at the mouth, fuming mad that Trump won. Last Lastly, a continuance is justified because it is detrimental to national unity. The people have signaled their desire for these prosecutions to cease. While the current administration seems intent on pursuing these cases up until Trump is inaugurated, such a course of action is not wise or beneficial. Now, as I look at this from a 1,000-point-foot perspective, I find it important to renew my warning that wielding extreme government force can lead to a dangerous cycle of escalation from both sides. I also renew my call from the same filing for the government to begin bestowing mercy on the hundreds of J6 defendants whose lives are being crushed by them. That warning and plea was included in a filing where I withdrew my motion for sanctions because I wanted peace and reconciliation, but my attempt at an olive branch was rejected by the government, and the prosecution team seems foolishly intent on vindictiveness in this final hour. It would be wise to view this as a final opportunity to make peace and take 2 weeks off in December because Trump is coming in. And for these reasons, I respectfully ask the court continue my trial date for at least 3 months. The government opposes a continuance. Should the court not grant this motion immediately, I ask the court to order a normal response times to be sped up so we can resolve this quickly because we've got trial coming up and we want to plan for Thanksgiving. Respectfully submitted as a pro se, meaning he's representing himself, William Pope, a J6 defendant out of the District of Columbia. Here is the government's response. So we read 2 motions to continue, one from Stephen Baker, one from Free State Will. This is the government's response in opposition to Baker, which will be the same basic template in most J6 cases. They say, all right, the United States is back. They say at a pretrial conference back in November, the defense said it was ready to go to trial. Then they notified that they wanted to change their plea. Steve Baker has taken a change of plea or is in the process of that, is my understanding. On Sunday, November 10th, the evening before Veterans Day, they then filed the instant motion. So they were going to go take a plea. He intended to enter pleas of guilty rather than going to a bench trial. Okay, so trial was scheduled. They said, nope, no trial, let's take a plea. Then Trump wins. Actually, they did that after the election, right? The election was on the 5th. They had the conference the next day. We're ready for trial. Then they say, actually, no, we're going to take a plea. Then actually, no, we're not going to take a plea. Then we're going to vacate the dates. They say, but nothing's changed. No material change to the facts or law have changed since November 6th because it's after the election. So like you said, you were ready for trial on the 6th. No takesy-backsies. There is a public interest in the prompt and efficient administration of justice. The government disagrees that a continuance is warranted here, and the court should proceed as in any other prosecution, as they did in all of these other cases, right? Huge paragraph of other cases. They cite to Jack Smith, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't match this case. That motion is about a president-elect, and there's no president-elect in this case. Steve Baker is just a private citizen, so it doesn't apply. And so since you said you were ready the day after the election, we are going to say that you're ready the day after the election, and we're not going to want a continuance signed by Monica Isaiah Jasowicz out of the DC's office. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep our eye on it. Hopefully these guys don't have to go to trial and go through all of this, but if they do, we hope Trump is very speedy with remedying these problems. Now, here is one person who's helping with the Trump transition. His name is Mark Paoletta, and he's an attorney, and he's issuing a stern warning to everybody in the DOJ who's continuing this type of garbage. He says, President Trump was elected by the American people to carry out his agenda, which includes the following. 1, securing the southern border, mass deportations of illegal aliens, beginning with the R's and the M's, surging resources to process immigration and asylum claims, clearing out backlogs, ending abuse of the asylum system, ending automatic citizenship for birthright, and taking federal actions to prevent sanctuary cities from obstructing federal immigration enforcement. That's a nice list. And this is called birthright citizenship. We're one of a few countries that still does it. And I think it's a misinterpretation of our law. It says subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If you're here illegally, you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the nation state. That's us. Therefore, you don't get citizenship. Restoring law and order across the country, rescuing our cities from prosecutors, stopping the lawfare and the persecution of political opponents like our J6ers. That is unprecedented in American history and destroying our democracy. He says we're going to grant pardons or commutations to J6 defendants and other defendants who've been subjected to politically driven lawfare prosecutions and sentences. We're going to abolish DEI, protect the right to speech, religion, and the Second Amendment, protect religious liberties, investigate and prosecute anti-Semitism, protect parents and their rights from irreparable transgender surgeries that are happening on our minors, paving the way for an energy boom and holding those accountable who weaponized the government to abuse Americans. These are all positions Trump has campaigned on and that career DOJ lawyers may be working on to accomplish Trump's lawful agenda. They're required, if you're at the DOJ, to do this. Hopefully, they will be as committed to helping Trump implement this agenda as they did associated with Biden. Of course, political leadership welcomes feedback to help improve a project, but once the decision is made to move forward, career employees are required to implement the plan. Of course, no one will push them to implement flagrantly illegal actions like Biden did with his student loan plan, where he thumbed his nose at the Supreme Court ruling and then tried to implement another illegal plan, which was also struck down. In fact, the media was cheering on his lawbreaking. We remember that. I don't recall reading any stories about career attorneys being concerned about blatantly violating the law then. If these career DOJ employees won't implement Trump's program in good faith, they should leave. Those employees who engage in so-called, quote, resistance against the duly elected president's lawful agenda would be subverting American democracy. Finally, those that take such actions would be subject to disciplinary matters, including termination. I look forward to President Trump's team making America great again, especially at the DOJ and the FBI. Here's Mark Paoletta explaining more.
You know, Brian, who would have thought it's controversial that when a new boss comes in with a new agenda, that the people who work there are going to support the president's agenda, right? Only in the federal government, only with a deep swamp do people, career employees think that they get to run the joint, as it were. President Trump, was reelected with an overwhelming majority of an agenda by the American people, popularly supported. So deporting millions of illegal aliens out of this country, securing the border, banning DEI, all that destructive stuff that the Biden administration let run wild, getting boys out of girls' sports. Those are all the things that the Department of Justice is going to work on. And those are the things that the Department of Justice employees, career employees, are going to support. And if they don't want to support it, they should leave.
Get out! You're not welcome if you're going to be there digging your heels in and obstructing the duly elected president's agenda. We're glad to see that these incoming individuals are there, and it sounds like they mean business. We'll be following along. Thanks for subscribing, as we do.